All right, conference championship game previews. Only 3 games left of football, so let's enjoy them while we can. In today's video, we'll be going over Jayden Daniels and this Eagles defense. This is great on great, so I wanted to start off with this side of the ball. I will make another video and upload it tomorrow where I covered the other side of the ball, and then that one I will give my actual game predictions, but I still will, the way this one will work is I'm going to get into some numbers, talk about the matchups that way, then we'll talk some film, and then finally I will get into my predictions for how I think this side of the ball will go. So yeah, let's just jump into it. So first, as always, we're going to start off with PFF grades for specific positional categories for each of these teams. So you see the Commanders offense and going up against the Eagles defense. You see, a lot of good stuff on this Eagles defense. There's a reason why they're currently favorites to win the Super Bowl, partially because I think the Vegas odds makers think both the Chiefs and Bills is such a tight game that they have the Eagles with an edge. But still, you see really good stuff. First in coverage, second in pass rush, second in run defense. The Commanders, fourth in passing, 15th in receiving, but the receiving's really stepped it up as of late. You also have 22nd in pass blocking, so perhaps maybe their biggest matchup advantage, the Eagles' biggest matchup advantage, is the Commanders' offensive line going up against the Eagles' defensive line, especially when you factor in the fact that the Commanders lost their best player, Sam Cosmi, which we'll get into in just a second. Commanders do run the ball well, though, 8th best, and with Jayden Daniels, it can give you an extra blocker, which makes it that much easier to run the ball. Let's actually go straight to the trenches here because you have to feel like that's a real notable thing. So what you see right here is these are the PFF grades for each of the Commanders' offensive linemen, or it's where they rank in terms of PFF. You notice the center is out of around 40 eligible players. Everyone else is out of around 80 eligible players for their position because there's twice as many guards and tackles than there are centers, obviously. You see, so Brandon Coleman 60th, Andrew Wiley is 59th. Andrew Wiley, of course, won a Super Bowl with the Chiefs, so you got that going for you at the very least. Not ideal there, definitely kind of weak spots. The one thing that you would say in a positive way with the Commanders' offensive line, though, is there isn't really a glaring hole. Usually they're kind of like, okay, Brandon Coleman's not great, Andrew Wiley's not great, but they're at least serviceable, and you have, your weak spots are serviceable. Sam Cosmi, who has been maybe their best player outside of Jayden Daniels this season, goes down with an injury. He's out for the season. He went down in a divisional game. Trent Scott will play right tackle. Only had a handful of snaps, a little more than a handful, but only a couple hundred snaps on the season. You're looking at a 47.7 PFF grade on those snaps, though. That is not good. That's out of 100. Usually 60 is what you hope for your backup to get. It's well below backup levels. That's a concern when you got the Eagles coming to town. You look at their starters and then rotational players. The top 4 are the guys who get the most amount of snaps. Only Josh Sweat and Jalen Carter are every down players. So Sweat and Carter will be out there for pretty much every down. Carter's an interior guy, Sweat's edge. Milton Williams is the next interior guy who gets the most snaps. Nolan Smith is another edge who gets a good amount of snaps. And then they rotate Jalix Hunt, Jordan Davis, and Moro Ojamo there. You see a lot of good PFF grades in the mix there, right? When your when your worst starter is 30th and it's Josh Sweat who's out there every snap, that's pretty good, right? So a lot of ways where you can get some pressure. Of course, the main thing you think about is, do you just put Jalen Carter on the backup guard, Trent Scott? Probably at least a little bit, right? See what that does. Now, what the Commanders can do to counter that is they can put their center on Carter, but then you have Nick Algeretti, who is, again, okay, but not elite. Having to block Milton Williams or Jordan Davis one-on-one when they're out there, that's a tough matchup, and to be honest, it's just one you're assuming the Eagles are going to win. That's an advantage, Philadelphia. I'd be shocked if it goes the other way. Sometimes it's like, okay, this is probably going to be an advantage for one team, but you never know. I'd be shocked if this ends up not being an advantage for Philadelphia. Even in the other 2 games, it was an advantage for Philadelphia. Of course, we got to talk about the receiving options as well. This laundry list of players are the players for the Commanders that get some snaps in the passing game, or at least have this season. You see, in terms of, so what you're looking at here is their grades, their PFF grades and yards per route ran when they're playing man and then when they're playing zone. You see Terry McLaurin, a zone killer, although still very good against the man. You have some other players. Dyami Brown's been awesome when he's played against man this season. They don't play a ton of man. The Eagles like to play a lot more zone, so you might be taking him out of the game a little bit if you can do that. Now, you do have other players who are good at beating zone, but as a whole, I mean, it's kind of like if you're going to play zone, which I think the Eagles are going to do, Terry McLaurin does benefit a little bit there. Dyami Brown could still be an outside threat, though. As for the Eagles' defensive backs here, you see I've done the same thing, except the two stats you're looking at are PFF grades and passer rating against man and against zone. Quinyon Mitchell, I have an asterisk next to him at the top of the list. He got banged up last week. Seems like he might play. I don't know what's going to happen. If he plays, that's a big boost for the Eagles. If he doesn't, that would be an issue. Then Isaiah Rodgers, who's at the bottom of the top section there, would be the guy who comes in and plays. If not, it would be Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, and Darius Slay as the three corners. CJ Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship are the two safeties. Look all the way over to the right. Like I said, they play a lot of zone. You see the passer rating against when they're in zone coverage. Quinyon Mitchell's amazing. Cooper DeJean, Darius Slay, and even Isaiah Rodgers has been very good when they're in zone. In man, Mitchell's gotten beat and Rodgers has gotten beat. That's worth noting because they will play some man. They will. Also, the safeties, really good in zone. The reality is, even if Isaiah Rodgers is out there, I don't hate this coverage at all. I think he's a solid depth player. But if you have the starting five secondary players in for Philadelphia, there's on paper no weakness. Although we'll get into it, but the Commanders did have some success last time these two teams played each other. So this is going to be the final charts that we look at before we get into the film. You see that Jayden Daniels, the first game, not overly effective. In fact, they got nothing going down the field. You see, a lot of players had catches for very small amount of yards, but Terry McLaurin was the leading wide receiver. He had one catch for 10 yards. Eckler had 89 yards, Ertz had 47 yards, but still, you kind of figure if they're going to win this game, it can't be with their leading wide receiver having 10 yards. The next time they played, though, Jayden Daniels had a wild stat line of 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He also had a lost fumble in there. You see, Olamide Zaccheaus had 70 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Terry McLaurin had a decent amount of yards. Dyami Brown had a decent amount of yards. And then you still got a large number of contributors because, again, a lot of players get snaps in the receiving room for this Commanders offense, but it's really those, I think, two guys, Terry McLaurin and Dyami Brown, that you're going to look towards. As for the rushing, you see that the first game they played, not a ton through the ground. Brian Robinson Jr., only 3.9 yards per carry, did have a touchdown in there, but still, Jayden Daniels, 7 carries for 18 yards. That's not great either. So, not a ton through the ground the first time, and the second time, it was kind of more of the same, but with an asterisk. You see that once again, if you look at the running backs, it wasn't great, but Jayden Daniels was the leading rusher in that game, 9 carries for 81 yards. We'll get into a couple of those carries, actually. But the Eagles did shut down the just traditional ground game, so that's worth noting as well. So, yeah, those are the numbers. Let's get into the film and kind of get into more detail about some of those numbers and what they mean. One thing I want to start off with the film is, I'm going to pause it right here. Fourth downs were Commanders love to go for it on fourth down. They I believe have already converted the most fourth downs in a single postseason, and they've only played 2 games, which is kind of crazy to think about. They're going to have fourth down opportunities. They're going to go for it. But as we mentioned, the Eagles have a defensive line advantage, which could matter in a situation like this. Watch as you're going to see the Eagles' defensive line does come through. They get that quick pressure and are able to make that work. That was Josh Sweat, who we talked about earlier as a really good edge rusher for them. I mean, he's someone who definitely can make a play, and if you're giving them opportunities, on these fourth down and ones, you don't have to stop them every time. If you can stop them sometime, that's an advantage for Philadelphia, and something that just Washington has to be a little bit more careful about. You can't maybe run all the plays you would like to, typically. Like, this play's another kind of example. This isn't a fourth down, but it's a first down. You see Jalen Carter again, this is part of why the running game wasn't so effective either time these two teams played each other. You see how Carter's able to get some initial penetration, just tie up Brian Robinson Jr. enough that I believe he actually lost the football on that one. Because that's the other thing, is Brian Robinson Jr. lost multiple footballs. He didn't lose multiple footballs. He lost the football multiple times. The Eagles will punch the ball out, and in the cold, I mean, we saw it just last week against the Rams. They got multiple plays there. So definitely, this is a difficult defensive line. Well, what do you do to counter that? Well, how about something like this? Pay no attention to the yellow circle. That's what the broadcast put on the screen. It's going to be a designed quarterback run. And what can make it easier to run the ball against a team like the Eagles is just give yourself an extra blocker. You don't have to waste the player just handing the ball off. You can now just have a designed quarterback run on 3rd down and 8. And again, part of, I think, the logic is if they don't quite get it, they can go for it on 4th. However, here, everyone's able to make their blocks, and they do pick up the 1st down right there. Everyone has to make their blocks. That's definitely a part of it. But still, there are ways to get stuff going through the ground. I think Daniels is going to have to be a big part of the ground game if they're going to have a consistent ground game. Now, there's something else. I mentioned that the Eagles do a really good job of covering, but you know what? As the old expression goes, a great throw and great catch can beat great coverage. Let's go over here. This is Dyami Brown going up one-on-one against Darius Slay. It's the player who wears number 2 going up against the player who wears number 2, which is kind of fun. I don't know why, but I find that fun. You see it's a one-on-one matchup here. Daniels is going to take the snap in his own end zone. I mean, again, they trust him. They know what they have in their quarterback. You see Dyami Brown is open. There's a window right here. I was saying a great throw and great catch beats great coverage. This is not great coverage. This is a window. Brown is beating Slay, and Daniels is going to make a perfect throw, which he has done all season. You also have this play going over here, where this is now going to be Terry McLaurin going up against Quinyon Mitchell. Also a one-on-one matchup right here, and as you can probably tell where this is going, watch what happens. You're going to see Daniels takes the snap, he's going to look in that direction, fires in that direction, and they get a long touchdown. And this is the dilemma you put yourself in if you're the Eagles. You kind of can't put 2 safeties deep because Jayden Daniels can rush with the football, and if you're giving him an extra blocker if he's rushing, and you have 2 safeties deep, what are you going to do? You just can't really do much of anything, honestly. So the reality is you're going to have to give them these opportunities. And if you give them these opportunities, your corners have to show up better than they did on these 2 plays. Also, this was a huge play. And if you remember the second time these 2 teams played each other, it was the Eagles had a big lead, but Jalen Hurts was hurt and the Commanders were able to kind of come back. This was a huge play in that game. It's a 4th down and 11. Daniels is going to take the snap. He looks down the field. This is good coverage, but he steps up, going to try and scramble for it. And to be honest, you got to be more aggressive in tackling him than the Eagles are on this play, certainly. I don't know if they thought he was going to slide or something, but it's 4th and 11. He's not sliding. And certainly in the conference championship game, he won't be sliding much. As you see, he sidesteps a couple of Eagles players and actually even gets around another one before finally getting brought down. You can't let that happen if you're the Philadelphia Eagles. But again, easier said than done to not let that happen when it's Jayden Daniels. So that's the other thing. One more thing I should bring up is I mentioned Daniels had 3 turnovers in this game, which is 3 more than he usually does. The Commanders had 5 turnovers when they've had 0 turnovers so far this postseason. Although I will mention that there is one other aspect to this, which is the Eagles playing a lot of zone coverage. You have things like this. The one issue that Daniels has had so far in his career, I would say, is that occasionally he will have those stretches where he'll just kind of miss some throws. That's the one the one nitpick really more than anything because he's been so good at everything else. But when that happens on a play like this over the middle route against zone coverage, you're going to see Daniels takes the snap, and he's going to let this one sail a little bit, but because it's zone coverage, now he throws it right to a safety, because if you miss in zone coverage, you're basically throwing it to a defender almost every time. So you kind of can't do that in this game. So that's maybe the one way the Eagles could win the turnover battle. I wouldn't bank on it, but it's possible. Another thing that I didn't bring up in the film study, because it's not really film, is the weather. So it's supposed to be, I believe, mid-30s during this game, because it will at least be sunny out. It's not the night game, which maybe helps. To my knowledge, I tried to do some research on this. I have not seen a game that Jayden Daniels has played in college or the pros that was under 50 degrees. So again, I don't know how he's going to handle this. He played in the SEC at LSU, not exactly a warm, cold weather area there. So, again, to bet against Jayden Daniels, you'd have to be a fool, right? What Jayden Daniels has done this season has been unbelievable, but there is just that added wild card factor of like, what if he's someone who struggles in the cold? We haven't seen that because he played in Tampa Bay in round 1 and then he played in the Dome in round 2. This is a different situation, but that doesn't mean that he will play poorly. Sometimes guys who, haven't played cold weather games come in and play absolutely fine. Sometimes guys really struggle. It's hard to know. So final predictions for this side of the ball now. The Washington Commanders' offensive points per drive on the year is 2.82, which is among the best in football. That's really good. The Eagles' defensive points per drive, also among the best in football at just 1.69. The first time, it was much closer to what the Eagles give up, 1.8 points per drive. The second time, it was much closer to what the Commanders score, 2.80 points per drive. My guess, I'm going to go with 2.5 points per drive. I think the Sam Cosmi injury hurts, and they won't be able to quite do as much as they were able to do the second time. Also, just not having your starting quarterback still kind of does affect things. You get, less possessions. Your possessions are shorter when you're, having your backup quarterback in. That does affect things for the Eagles a bit. But honestly, I'm not even really thinking too much about those two matchups. I mean, I'm paying attention to them, right? They were both somewhat recently. Like, the second matchup was week 16, which is not that long ago at all. But I just feel like this Eagles defensive line is such an advantage, and I feel like they should be able to battle in the secondary. The X factor is Jayden Daniels, who, if he is playing at his best, is borderline unstoppable, maybe just unstoppable, get rid of the borderline. He is an incredible player. So again, only a fool is betting against that guy at this point. So I'm still going to go with 2.5, which is closer to what the Eagles do closer to what the Commanders do than what the Eagles do. But also that's kind of how football works, is if you have a team that gives up 1.7 points per drive and a team that scores 2.8 points per drive, usually it's closer to the 2.8 than the 1.7. Not always, though, and again, the weather is a total X factor as well, but those are my thoughts on all of this. Stay tuned for the video tomorrow where I go over the other side of the ball. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.